The convent of San Miguel de las Aguas had stood in the mountains of Michoacán for nearly 400 years, its pale stone walls weathered by rain and time. Built in the 1620s by Franciscan monks over an older indigenous settlement, it carried the weight of centuries, both spiritual and temporal. In the autumn of 2024, a team of restoration architects arrived to repair structural damage and preserve the building before it crumbled entirely. Among them were Diego Morales, a meticulous conservationist in his 50s, and his daughter Catalina, a historian more interested in secrets than surfaces. On the third day of work, while removing deteriorated plaster from the eastern wall of the nave, the entire section gave way. The collapse was sudden, a sound like thunder from within the stone itself. What emerged from the dust was not empty space, but a passage. And beyond it, carved into the darkness, lay a chamber that no official record mentioned. The walls bore markings, geometric symbols arranged in deliberate patterns, some resembling crosses, others far older in their geometry. Local workers crossed themselves and stepped back. Diego and Catalina stepped forward. What they were about to discover would rewrite the history of the convent itself and force them to question whether some secrets were meant to remain buried. The symbols suggested a truth that the church had worked for centuries to conceal, that this place of prayer had once served a very different purpose, and someone, somewhere, had been waiting for someone like them to find it. Chapter 1. The Weight of Stone. The morning light filtered through the convent's arched windows as Diego examined the eastern wall section. Hairline fractures spiderwebbed across the surface, a sign the structural integrity was failing. He ran his hand along the stone, feeling the grain, the history compressed into mineral form. Catalina stood beside him with her camera, documenting everything. At 32, she had spent a decade studying colonial-era ecclesiastical construction in Michoacán, but this convent had always resisted easy explanation. The plaster dates to the 18th century, Diego said, tapping a section. But look beneath. See how the stone itself is laid differently here? This wall was repaired, not original. Catalina moved closer, her eye catching what most restorers missed. Repaired badly. They were trying to hide something. The local crew, 3 men from the nearby village of Santa Ana, arrived at 7 in the morning. Diego assigned them to carefully remove the outer plaster layer. The work was methodical, meant to take days. He wanted no damage to whatever lay beneath. But stone, when its time has come, does not always wait for permission. It was nearly noon when the sound came. A deep crack, like a rifle shot, echoed through the nave. One of the workers, Miguel, shouted a warning. Diego looked up to see the wall moving, not collapsing entirely but shifting, subsiding. The plaster exploded into dust. Pieces of stone tumbled inward. Then came the silence. When the dust settled enough to see, the impossibility revealed itself. The wall had not collapsed randomly. It had fallen away from something. Beyond the rubble lay an opening, a passage carved directly into the mountain itself. The stone around its edges was darker, different in texture. Ancient, Diego's breath caught. Beside him, Catalina was already moving forward, her phone's flashlight cutting through the settling particles. In the beam, they could see the far wall of the passage, perhaps 15 feet in. And on that wall, carved with precision and intention, were symbols. Catalina's voice was barely a whisper. Mija de Dios. Those aren't Christian crosses. Diego stepped carefully over the rubble, his conservator's mind already cataloging, already questioning. The symbols were geometric. Circles within diamonds, stars with unequal points, and yes, crosses, but crosses arranged in patterns that did not match any liturgical tradition he knew. Some bore resemblance to pre-Hispanic glyphs, the kind he'd seen in museums. Others were altogether different. The 3 workers remained outside, their tools abandoned. Miguel crossed himself again and moved back toward the exit. We need to photograph this before we touch anything, Catalina said, already clicking images. Before anyone else knows it's here. Before someone decides it should be reburied, Diego finished. In that moment, as dust still swirled in the late morning light, Neither of them understood how true that statement would prove. Behind them, outside the convent walls in the village of Santa Ana, the news was already spreading. By evening, others would know. And by tomorrow, those others would begin to arrive. Men and women with different ideas about what the convent should hide and what it should yield. But for now, father and daughter stood in the passage, staring at symbols that suggested the church's history in Michoacán was not the history it had taught. Chapter 2. The First Descent. The darkness inside the passage was complete. Diego had brought industrial-grade flashlights, the kind used in archaeological digs. He secured one around his forehead, transforming himself into a human beacon. Catalina did the same. They had waited until evening, until the village had grown quiet, before returning with equipment. They'd told the local authorities a small structural assessment was needed, enough to justify being in the convent after hours. The passage descended, not steeply, but enough that they felt the gravitational pull with each step. The stone beneath their feet was worn smooth. Centuries of footfalls had polished it like water might. Diego knelt, examining the surface. People walked here, regularly. This wasn't a shrine visited once a year. This was used. The air grew cooler as they went deeper. 50 feet in, maybe 75, the passage opened into a chamber. The beam of their flashlights couldn't reach the far wall at first. Then, as their eyes adjusted and they stepped inside, the vastness became apparent. This was no small storage room. This was a crypt. Wooden benches, or the remains of them, lined the walls. Some had collapsed into splinters, their wood turned gray by age. Others still held their shape, though they looked as though a strong wind might finish what time had begun. At the far end of the chamber, the wall rose perhaps 20 feet, and on every surface the symbols continued. "This is systematic," Catalina breathed, her voice small in the vast quiet. "This isn't random carving, this is a language." But it was the stone boxes that demanded attention. 6 of them, arranged in 2 rows along the chamber's left side. Sepulchres, unmistakably. Carved from single blocks of stone, each bore its own symbol on the lid. Some were open, empty for centuries. Others remained sealed. Diego approached the nearest one cautiously. The symbol carved on its lid was a double circle with radiating lines. Beneath it, barely visible in the dust of centuries, was a date. He brushed it clear with his palm, his heart accelerating as the numbers came into focus. 1642, he said aloud. That's... Catalina consulted her notes, her mind already spinning. 50 years after the convent was founded. Diego, why would they build a crypt and then seal it? Why would they bury this place? A sound from above stopped them both. Footsteps. More than one person. Diego killed his flashlight. Catalina did the same. In the absolute darkness of the crypt they waited, listening as voices echoed faintly through the passage. They were distant but distinct enough to hear words. Find them before they understand what they've found. The voices moved away, back toward the main chamber of the convent. We need to leave, Diego whispered. Someone followed us. But before they moved, Catalina's hand found his arm. She pulled it toward one of the sealed sepulchres. In the thin light from her phone, just enough to see without illuminating the space, she showed him something. At the edge of one of the sealed stone boxes, beneath centuries of dust, something protruded, something that gleamed faintly in the dark. Gold. Chapter 3. The Watchers. The village of Santa Ana was small enough that news traveled faster than vehicles. By the next morning, Diego and Catalina understood that their discovery had become public knowledge. The construction crew's gossip, Miguel's family, the priest's conversation with the mayor, it had all woven together into rumor that now circulated through every cafe and market stall. What neither of them expected was the first visitor. He arrived in a truck that was too new, too clean for a place like Santa Ana. He wore a linen shirt that cost more than most villagers made in a month, and his shoes had never touched actual dirt. He introduced himself as Francisco Hector, representing a collector of pre-Columbian artifacts in Mexico City. He was interested in the convent's restoration, he said. particularly in anything of historical value that might be discovered. "We're preservationists, not sellers," Diego told him, their meeting happening in the convent's courtyard. Catalina stood nearby, her arms crossed. "Of course," Francisco smiled without warmth, "but preservation requires funding. Perhaps whatever you find down there, because I know something is down there, might interest institutions, museums. There's a market for historical documentation." He left an offer written on expensive paper. Then he left. Catalina waited until his truck disappeared down the mountain road. He wasn't trying to hide his interest. "Which means there are others trying not to hide theirs," Diego said. That night they made their second descent into the crypt. This time they came prepared to open the sealed sepulchre. They had tools, documentation equipment, and a growing sense of urgency. The chamber seemed smaller on the second visit. Knowledge had made it more real somehow, but also more fragile. The glint Catalina had seen had indeed been gold. As they carefully chipped away the mortar sealing the stone box, a crucifix emerged, but not a Catholic crucifix. This cross bore symbols at each of its 4 points, and the material was not pure gold but an alloy, ancient with a patina that spoke of centuries. Beneath the cross, wrapped in textile so degraded it might have been spider silk, was a journal. The leather binding had calcified, but the pages inside, protected by centuries of sealed stone, were surprisingly intact. The handwriting was colonial Spanish, precise and urgent. Diego photographed each page with trembling hands. Catalina read passages aloud, translating the archaic language. "The Indians maintained their practices even beneath the cross we built. We could not destroy their faith, only bury it. The crypts were agreed upon, a space where both truths could rest, neither conquering the other." "They made a compromise," Catalina whispered. "A hidden compromise. The convent wasn't built to convert this place, it was built to contain it." A sound from above interrupted them again, but this time, it was different, deliberate. Footsteps, multiple sets, entering the crypt passage. Diego immediately sealed the photographs to the cloud. "Go," he told Catalina. "There's a second passage, behind the southern bench. I saw the draft when we came in. Find it. I'll distract them. I'm not leaving you. You're the historian. They want the knowledge. I'm just the conservationist. Go." Chapter 4. The Second Truth. The southern passage existed, but finding it in near darkness while men's voices echoed closer was a test of survival. Catalina felt the draft, followed it to where stone had been deliberately stacked to conceal an opening. She squeezed through, her shoulders scraping against ancient walls, and found herself in a tunnel that descended at an angle her father's passage had not. Behind her, she heard her father's voice, steady and defiant. "I'm sorry, but this is protected cultural heritage. You have no authority." A voice she didn't recognize responded, not Francisco's. Someone official, someone with weight. "Everything built on this land belongs to the church, Señor Morales. That includes crypts. That includes secrets. Your discovery is being confiscated under ecclesiastical jurisdiction. You should thank God you're being allowed to leave with your life." Catalina's hands shook as she moved deeper into the tunnel. The draft was cooler here, and after 50 feet the passage opened into a second chamber. This one bore no symbols. Instead, it was a library carved from stone itself. Shelves, cut directly into the walls, held bound documents, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were wrapped in cloth that had hardened almost to wood. But through gaps, she could see the spines of books written in languages she recognized and many she didn't. At the center of the chamber, arranged in a careful circle, lay stone tablets. On these were carved symbols, the same symbols from the first crypt, but here arranged in patterns that suddenly made sense to her. They weren't mystical, they were linguistic. They were a key. She began photographing everything, moving frantically through the chamber. Her phone's battery warned her 15%. The tunnel behind her fell silent. Then, from the passage, she heard her father call out, "Catalina, if you're there, Keep going. Don't look back. His voice was calm. It was the voice of someone who had already accepted what came next. She didn't stop photographing until her phone died. Chapter 5. The choice darkness was absolute when her phone's light extinguished. Catalina stood in the center of a 200-year-old library that no one in the modern world had seen, and she had minutes to decide if she would live or let its secrets die with her. The air in the tunnel had shifted. No voices came from behind her. Either her father had negotiated silence or the men searching had found what they wanted. She couldn't afford the emotional cost of considering which was true. She worked by touch and memory, filling her camera bag with tablets, photographs, anything portable. The documents were too fragile to move. But the tablets, stone, durable, and covered with carved symbols that the church had clearly wanted erased from history, these she could carry. The second passage descended still further, and after what felt like an hour of careful movement through darkness, Catalina heard something that made her pause. Water. Running water, louder as she moved forward. The tunnel opened into a cavern, and at its center flowed an underground river. In the pale light filtering from above, moonlight coming through a crevasse in the cavern ceiling, Catalina could see what the ancients had built this entire hidden network to reach. This river, this subterranean lifeline, flowed directly beneath the convent. It was why they had settled here, why they had built their temples here, why even beneath the cross, they had maintained their connection to this sacred water. The church hadn't just built a convent over an indigenous sacred site. It had co-opted it, studied it, and then hidden it away. The crypts and symbols weren't heretical secrets. They were the evidence of a negotiation between faiths, one that neither the indigenous nor the Spanish leadership wanted known. Catalina heard voices again, this time from multiple directions. The church's agents were searching the cavern system. They would find her eventually. She looked at the river, at the darkness beyond it, at the path forward that would lead her away from everything she'd discovered. Then she looked back at the tablets in her bag, at the photographs on her broken phone. She had a choice: run and preserve some evidence, or hide and hope that her father had negotiated something with the men who held power. Chapter 6. The Weight of Truth. 3 days later, Catalina emerged from the convent, officially reported as lost in the cave system during an unsupervised exploration. The rescue had been successful. She was dehydrated and exhausted but unharmed. The convent's eastern wall had been sealed with new mortar and stone. The restoration project, the official statement said, had been completed. The building was stable. Her father was not released with her. He had been detained, the church claimed, for questioning about his unauthorized excavation and removal of protected artifacts. The tablets in Catalina's bag, 6 of them, covered in symbols that told a story of ancient compromise and colonial concealment, became her leverage. It took 4 weeks of careful negotiation, leaked photographs to academic institutions, and very public pressure from UNESCO before Diego was released. By then, his story was already spreading. The hidden crypt of Michoacán, the symbols of a faith preserved beneath another faith, the library of documents that might rewrite colonial history. The church maintained its official position. The symbols were Christian in nature. The crypts were simply burial chambers. The library was ecclesiastical records. The discovery was significant, they admitted, but nothing that challenged the narrative of conversion and progress. But in universities across Mexico and beyond, scholars were studying the photographs Catalina had managed to preserve. The symbols they were discovering told a different story, one of negotiation rather than conquest, of 2 faiths finding a way to coexist beneath the same roof, in the same stone, in the same sacred ground. The convent of San Miguel de las Aguas stood restored, its walls sealed once more, but what had been hidden could not be entirely hidden again. In the memory of those who had glimpsed its truth, in the photographs preserved in digital archives, in the academic papers beginning to circulate, the real history was being written. Diego and Catalina left Michoacán with their lives and their integrity, which proved to be the only treasures that could not be confiscated. The gold objects, the journals, the documents, these the church would keep, locked away in archives that remained closed to public scrutiny. But the truth, like water, finds a way through stone. It flows beneath the surface, persistent and patient. And one day, when the weight of secrecy becomes too great to bear, it rises into the light. If this treasure hunt already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of discovery and hidden history. See you in the next adventure.